So thank you. So I changed the title. Then it's different than what's in the program, but going to talk about a centralized team in a decentralized world. Before I get into that, I'm going to tell you a short story. So when I was a kid, I was very obsessed with fighter jets, and I read everything I could about fighter jets. And in particular, I was obsessed with this plane in particular. This is the F-14 Tomcat. A lot of you will know this from Top Gun. And so I could tell you everything about this plane, the armaments, its range, everything. But as I grew up, my love for fighter jets dwindled, and I just saw planes as something that I would occasionally get into and fly. But in learning about airplanes, I learned a lot about aerodynamics. And I was still to this day fascinated with the basic concepts of aerodynamics and what can allow a plane this big and this heavy to fly. And there's really four basic forces, and I'm not going to get in too deep, that allow a plane like this to fly. The first, of course, is thrust. The engines on the plane are pushing this plane down the runway as fast as possible. As the plane speeds up, a second force of drag, as the air flows over and the resistance, the density of the air, as well as the resistance of the road, the runway, will prevent that plane from going faster. As air continues to flow faster and faster over the wings, the Bernoulli effect takes place, which creates a low pressure zone over the wings and provides lift, which lifts the plane up. In order to get the plane to take off, and you have to have enough lift to counteract a fourth force, which is weight. So these four forces are constantly playing to allow a plane to fly and keep it in the air. So when I think about engineering tools, this is the team I work at Netflix, there's a lot of forces at play that can either we are trying to increase, and there are other forces that we're trying to minimize and decrease in order to be an effective organization at Netflix. Our role at Netflix is to provide tools and services for engineers to deliver code to production. And so one of these forces is customers. So one of our goals is to increase the number of customers at Netflix we have, and not only increase the number of customers we have, but increase the number of delighted customers we have. We also want to increase innovation. We want to make sure that the products that we deliver to our customers are as innovative as possible. We're solving not only the problems we have now, but the problems we have in the future. But as we increase the rate of innovation, we have to be considerate of the fact that we're constantly pushing change on our customers. And so we want to as we increase innovation, we have to think about how that affects the change and the impact to our customers. And then we also have this fourth force, which is support. And as we build tools, we have to support these tools because people are using them in production and they're using this every day. So these are the four forces I'm going to spend the rest of the talk talking about. There are more forces than these four. These are the ones I chose to talk about. And so another way to think about this is engineering tools wants to increase the number of delighted customers we have while decreasing the costs or the waste to support these tools. And we also want to increase the rate of innovation while decreasing the impact of any change that we put on our customers. So let's talk about customers. So our customers at Netflix, like I said, are engineers. And so the beauty of that is that we understand their needs to some extent because we are also engineers. And so from the beginning, it's pretty easy to put ourselves in their shoes. We have to be careful about making too many assumptions. We also have a very well-defined and strong culture. And this culture is a benefit and also a constraint for a team like engineering tools. You probably read a little bit about Netflix's culture of freedom and responsibility. I'm going to touch on this a little bit. The talk is not necessarily about that, but in the short summary is we hire senior engineers, we have a high trust culture, and we expect, we have a context, not control, and culture where managers don't micromanage engineers, they provide high-level context, and engineers are given the freedom to do what they think is best. With that freedom, of course, comes responsibility, and those two you cannot decouple. But this serves as a constraint for engineering tools. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. It wouldn't be a presentation if I didn't mention this word. So As you know, Netflix does this thing, microservices. And in one of the keynotes this morning, they talked about how microservices and Conway's law and this impact of this replicates the communication between your teams. At Netflix, all these microservices have a team associated behind them, and these teams work autonomously. And what this means is these teams are highly aligned to the business goals of the company, which is to produce great internet television experience, but loosely coupled. And so these teams can operate fairly independently and can essentially deploy to production as fast as they want to. So when you hear metrics about Netflix deploying to production, hundreds or thousands of times a day, a lot of this it's really dependent upon which team, and each team is working at the pace that they feel comfortable. What this leads to are subcultures within Netflix. So we have this very strong and potent culture, and then each team ends up evolving this subculture. And this is something that's very common in almost all organizations. And you'll see it even if you look at your own organization. A hiring manager will be responsible for a team. That team has a goal, and that person will hire individuals they think will help them achieve that goal. And underneath, there'll be unconscious biases that they're applying to their hiring process to develop the goals of that team. And this team ends up evolving a certain set of sub-beliefs. And these beliefs I've observed across especially Netflix and other companies, can be varied, widely varied. And this impacts our organization at Netflix, engineering tools. What's also an interesting side effect of a freedom responsibility culture is that engineers at Netflix can choose not to use the tools and services that we provide. So we're incentivized to produce tools that customers want to use and maintain those tools and maintain satisfaction, because engineers at some point can turn to us and say, I don't like this tool, you guys aren't supporting it, I'm not going to use it. This is a great force. There is some waste that's generated by individuals, individual teams not using our tools and doing something not on our solution path, but overall it's a benefit to our team. And as a result of this kind of tension of producing great product, we have to think about producing products and not tools. And so the engineering tools team, we really try to focus on developing great products for our customers. And so you'll see our product that we actually deliver, we call it the paved road. And the paved road is the path in which all the tools that can get source code into production as fast as possible. In practice, it looks like this. And I'm not going to spend much time digging into these tools, and this is a very high level, but these are kind of the primary tools in the path of deploying to production. The first half is a lot of tools that a lot of Java shops will use. Nebula is a suite of Gradle plugins that my team develops that help apply some conventions to make it easier to build products. We bake. So how many people know what the baking process is at Netflix? Okay. So just real quick, baking is the process in which we take, every time we deploy code to production, we never change code on a running instance. We apply the immutable server pattern. So if I want to change code, I have to check that code in and create a new instance of a pipeline that will create a new Amazon machine image based on the code that I applied, and then we destroy the old AMI in production and stand up a new one. We call this baking. And so we have some tools. Aminator is open source, is the tool we use under the covers to bake. And then we also deploy with a tool that we have yet to open source called Spinnaker. I'm teasing you because this is the successor to Asgard, if anyone uses Asgard, and I'm not going to tell you anything more about it. So, but it will eventually be open source. So, but what we found is that this paved road, if we go back to this one solution, this is the solution that we feel comfortable supporting and we're responsible for, and we have the freedom to kind of choose those components inside this solution. But inevitably, some team will come to us with their own culture and their own beliefs and say, we don't want to use, for instance, Jenkins, or we don't want to bake. And so what we found is that this one solution, this one paved road, does not fit all. And so we have to think about composing a solution that fits a wide spectrum of needs for our customers. So some customers think about the paved road, they want to think about it as a single black box where they produce code, they check it in, and out comes servers at the other end. And we want to make sure that we have a solution that is optimized for them, as well as the customers that say, I want the paved road a la carte. I want to pull in pieces, and I'm going to weave them together myself, or I might even not even use all the components that you guys provide. And so we have to think about how we can provide solutions that suits both these sets of customers equally. And then on top of that, we also have to remember to also be our own customer. So I recently had an experience where I played with a tool that I hadn't used before for the first time, and it was an awful, awful experience. It wasn't one of the ones I showed you, but it was one of kind of, I would say, our tier 2 or tier 3 tools. And it really made me realize that the service that we're providing our customers can be frustrating, and this can lead to dissatisfaction, which can lead to customers thinking that engineering tools is not producing products that suit their needs. So it's good to remember that we as a tools team, we always have to remember to continually use our own tools and solicit that feedback from ourselves as well. So let's talk about support. So this is a pretty obvious statement. Sometimes tools break. And with the paved road and the pipeline at Netflix, our culture dictates that if you build it, you support it. And this is throughout Netflix. There's no ops team at Netflix. The engineering tools team is responsible for this paved road and the tools that enable engineers to deploy to production. But we're not responsible for engineers' builds. We're not responsible for their code. We're not responsible for their assets, their instances in production. They're responsible for those. What we are responsible for is making sure that the pipeline and the delivery system is working, and as much as possible, they have support when something breaks. So when things do break, we have to think about how do we engage with our customers quickly to make sure that they have the support they need. And so the fastest path to getting support is chat. And so we use HipChat, and a lot of people are probably using chat or Slack or some other chat tool. This is a super low friction way of getting our customers to interact with us. It's also pretty lossy. So if you've ever been in a big chat room where something's going wrong and you're injecting a question and you're trying to get help, there's a good chance things are going to get lost. Your message is going to get lost. Email is another common way to get support. So we have email distro, and people can email us. This tends to be probably just as low friction as chat, but it's a little less lossy on our end because we tend to monitor and make sure that we always are closing things out. But there's a chance that things will get lost in this mix. Interesting enough, because Netflix's culture is everyone is co-located in Los Gatos, when we hire engineers, we relocate them to California. This is actually one of the best ways of getting support because everyone's in the same 2 buildings. So we have a lot of walk-bys, and this is great for really tough problems. If we're in chat with somebody and they have a really tough problem, we'll say, bring your laptop down, we'll sit with you, and we'll solve this problem. But what this leads to is a lot of interruptions. And if anyone here is in ops, you're probably sitting there saying, yeah, I know, this is my life. And so for a tools team, we actually have we're software engineers. There's some of us that are really kind of more on the systems engineering and ops side, but most of us are software engineers. So this is, in some ways, not necessarily a scenario that they've encountered before. And so as a manager and as a tools team, we really have to remember to protect the engineer's maker schedule. And so this is a term that Paul Graham, I think, coined. And there's a great blog post about maker schedule. But you might also think about this as flow. As an engineer, when you're trying to solve a really tough problem, it's going to take you a long time to get into that state where you can take all the code, the mental model, the model of the code, and hold it in your head while you're working on it. Having someone interrupt you, monitoring HipChat, email, is going to interrupt that flow, and you're going to be less productive. So the way we combat this is we first have our first responder model. So our first responder model is very, very simple, and this is something we stole from many, many ops teams, is that all the engineers on our teams have a rotation, and you're on the rotation for answering email, HipChat, and customer walk-bys. What this does is it allows all the rest of the engineers to shut off HipChat, email for the whole day, put on headphones, go into a hole, find some place, dark corner of Netflix's office, and work on really tough problems. What you may be saying, though, is this is all very, very ad hoc, and it's true. As Netflix has grown, we've been able to deal with supporting our tools, engineering tools have been able to support in a very ad hoc manner. We are hitting a point right now where we're realizing that this is actually not going to scale, and it's starting to fall apart right now. So this is a part of the talk where I'm not saying we're perfect. This is what are the things we do really bad. We've avoided having a ticketing system, and it's because probably when I said ticketing system, half of you just shuddered. Ticketing systems are, inevitably engineers don't like them, and I can agree. It seems like a lot of overhead. Using HipChat and email sounds pretty easy. But the reality is we're going to eventually need to build a ticketing system in. The challenge is we don't want to create a high friction interface between us and our customers. So the trick is going to have to be taking advantage of HipChat, email, and the other low friction ways in which engineers engage with us, and underneath the covers, allowing them to create tickets that are in a very easy way. So if you've ever used, Qbot, using something like Qbot to allow tickets to be created in the background. Another aspect of this is making sure that customers can get support in the context of the tools that they're using. So this is a screenshot from Spinnaker, and where inside the application, teams can click on a button to create a Jira issue or can open up the HipChat room. What's nice about this is that they don't have to think about, and I've been in the scenario where I was like, oh, I have a problem with this tool. What's the name of the tool? Which is the Jira project? Where's the Jira project? Who owns this project? And they don't have to think about that. They can click on this button at the top, and we can get the feedback. So being able to create, we want to minimize that context switching, which engineers have to do in order to get feedback to us. But we also want to minimize the friction. But we don't want to do it too much, because if we minimize the friction and make it too easy, what we're going to get is inundated with a lot of random support issues that actually aren't that important to our customers. OK. So I'm going to talk about innovation. So one of the challenges historically engineering tools team has, and this may sound common to some internal tools teams or ops teams, is that you build something, it works, and eventually you say, I'm going to move my focus onto something else internally. And that tool, which is working and customers are using, eventually say, I love it, but it doesn't do one thing that I really want. And our response might be, well, we're not focused on that. We're focused on something else. So inevitably, some of these tools will end up stagnating. And taken too far, this can be a bad thing. I'm going to argue that, well, let me tell you a story first. So how many people have ever used Asgard? Okay, so a few of you. So Asgard, real quick, is a Grails-based application that we open source that sits in front of AWS and allows engineers at Netflix to manage their applications. These are applications right here on the left, and do cloud deployments, manage how many instances, scaling up, everything like that. So this provides abstractions on top of AWS that AWS didn't have at the time, like an application, allows us to do red-black pushes against ASGs, et cetera. Asgard was a great success. It's still being used today. The challenge is some teams came to us and said, Asgard is great, but I want these new features. And engineering tools historically said, we don't have time to do that, or we're doing something else. So these teams at Netflix went off and built their own deployment tools to handle this problem. I think one instance of that was probably good. What ended up happening, about 3 other teams built these deployment tools. And so now we're in a state at Netflix where we had like 4 deployment tools right now managing code to production. This was an instance of this taking too far. But I would argue that this is actually something we kind of encourage still to this day, because it allows us to distribute some of the innovation. So if there's a team that we know and we have a good relationship with that is going to move faster than the rest of the company, we're going to encourage them to take little risks and take little experiments and say, Asgard does this, or Spinnaker does this. You guys want to try this new thing? Go do that, and then let us know if it works. And then come back to us, and then if that works, because as engineering tools, our goal is to support the 80%. We have to support the majority of customers at Netflix, or majority of engineers at Netflix. And if one team has a unique need, it's a great way to test that out, and then feed that back into the rest to engineering tools. So this is a picture from the most recent hack day we had at Netflix. And I love this picture because this is a team that for this hack day put Netflix experience on a Nintendo NES and was able to get it running and played House of Cards in front of the whole company. It was awesome. I don't know how they did it, but it's very impressive. But these hack days are a great example of how innovation has been injected into the culture of Netflix. Granted, these hack days tend to be more fun. Some of these hacks tend to be silly, like this one. Like we're never ever going to actually release Netflix on Nintendo NES. But this idea of creating a culture that you can create space and innovation for innovation. When I've taken over a couple of engineering teams, and in the assessment of starting these engineering working with these engineering teams, you would find that they don't have time for innovation. And so what I would do is I would periodically just say, every other Tuesday, my team is going to be in a hack day. They will be unavailable to the rest of the organization, so you can't ask questions. If you have questions, ask me. I'll be on support. And I would tell the team that I will buy them lunch. I will do, fun things for them, whatever they needed to do. But I will protect their time, and they have, a full day every 2 weeks or whatever to hack on something. This idea, this is a very easy, in theory, you have to be willing to stand up for your team, easy concept to create space for your team to innovate and give them the freedom to choose different projects that they're excited about. This quote is from Daniel Jacobson, who's the VP of Edge Engineering at Netflix. And this is a belief that not everyone can actually execute in reality because it's really, really hard to do. Most companies don't believe this, but it's his belief that in order to inject innovation, you actually have to create space. And this is interpreting this in a different way is that not over-allocating your team with work, thinking about not achieving that 100% allocation for a team, but really achieving maybe a 70 or 80% allocation, and then giving them that space to really innovate. So his argument is to hire beyond your needs. I think at Netflix we have the opportunity to do that. If you do not, I think you think about this differently is not over-allocating your team and giving them the space to actually solve some of the tough problems that aren't problems today, but in the future. And all three of these for innovation, they're really set around creating this space, creating this opportunity, this room to say, I actually do have time this Friday to solve this interesting problem, create this command line tool that I know that 3 customers might want. So I think this is an important concept of creating space for innovation. So the fourth topic, change, is actually probably the topic I think I'm most excited about, and it probably seems, besides support, the most boring. But let me tell you a story, and then you can see why I'm excited about it. So in 2014, the engineering tools team had a bunch of migrations that we had to embark on. We decided to get the company off of Perforce and move to Git. We had to get off Java 6 and onto Java 7. We had to evacuate the data center, and we're moving everything into the cloud. So a lot of the tools that ran in the data center, like Jenkins, had to be migrated out of the data center into the cloud. And as a result, we found it was better to shard Jenkins into multiple Jenkins instances for each team. But the result is this is a lot of change that we had to force on the rest of the company. And at the end of 2014, the company was like, we're done. We did all these things, and everyone's like, we're done. We're great. Like, I can finally, engineering tools is not burdening us with all these different migrations. And then we did this, which is inevitable because, in some ways, for instance, the first one right there, Ant to Gradle, we wanted to make an innovation in how we our build tool. We wanted to get off of we wanted to get from CentOS and Precise onto Trusty, a single operating system. We wanted to move to Spinnaker, Tomcat, and then, of course, we just went to Java 7, so might as well get to Java 8, right? So the challenge is the company kind of looked at us and said, we just did this last year, why are we doing this again? And the lesson we really learned as a centralized team is that change is a constant, right? And if you don't treat it as a constant, you're going to get yourself in trouble. And so we started changing our mentality regarding change, which away from thinking about it as something we have to do in a small little finite moment, and that building a relationship with our customers that we're constantly pushing change on them and making change easy. And so we started launching what we call change campaigns for each of these initiatives, right? And we really started to think of change in a very serious way. One of the first things we started doing is we started targeting communication. we realized that whenever we would send a blast email to everyone in the company saying, we're going to get off Java 8, and we keep doing those types of things, the company would start ignoring our emails. So being able to detect which applications are on Java 7 and targeting them, in email communication by automating communication to them and saying, your applications, these 5 applications that you own are currently in Java 7, need to be migrated. You reculture the company saying that engineering tools is actually targeting communications. When I receive information from them, I'm pretty certain it is actually something I need to take action on. We also realized we had to move beyond email. So email is great. We found that it captured a certain percentage of the population, but we started doing things like creating these awesome posters and putting them around the office. We started using banners in HIP chat room to announce certain events were coming up. We have a tool called Blesk, which is, I'm going to say it's open source, but it's not really. Blesk is a JavaScript library that you can put in any application inside your application. And then there's a backend, and you can post a message on the backend Blesk, and it will show up in all the various applications. So we have Blesk JavaScript snippets on top of Jira, Jenkins, anywhere engineers tend to frequent. And that way, wherever they are, they will see these messages. And then we also have this system called Go, which a lot of companies I found do something similar. When I came to Netflix, I found it was one of the simplest and greatest innovations. So Go is essentially just an internal URL shortener. And so we can create URLs like go/migrations, and that URL will redirect to a Confluence page, for instance. But what this also creates is a language internally that people can then say, hey, go/migrations or go Java 8. And they'll know or they can guess even that if I say go/Java 8 will lead me to a place that will tell me everything I need to know about that particular migration. It makes it very easy to find information without having to do complex DNS lookups. This is also a great, if your company doesn't have one, a great hack day project, because I don't think there's a lot of work that's needed to build something like this. And you imagine that there's great benefits from that immediately. So how many people are familiar with this picture? OK. So this is the adoption curve. And once we started viewing each of these change campaigns through the lens of an adoption curve, it really helped us manage the rate of change and how we changed. We went through a migration. And we found that over the course of a change campaign internally at Netflix, we had to evolve our message as the rate of adoption increased. And I'll show you an example. So we release a new tool, or we make, say, Java. Let's go use the example of Java 8, because we're actually, this week, we just migrated the runtime to Java 8. So we want beta testers, right? And so we'll announce that Java 8 is on the base AMI, so any applications can start using it. And this will inevitably catch the people that have been waiting for Java 8 from day one, since its release. So they'll jump on this, and we don't have to do anything more than announce that it's actually available. And even by saying beta, those early adopters will be more tolerant of issues and bugs, and will likely give you feedback. And so you'll be able to refine this tool or system. So in Java 8, we don't really have to do much refinement, but internal tools, we're really looking for feedback on whether it's working and what's not working. Then we'll announce it's production ready, and just the change in that language from beta to production ready, people will say, OK, I think they've worked out the kinks. Now we're going to start using it, and we'll capture a certain increased population. And then inevitably, a team will come to us and say, I have this problem. And we'll say, well, have you tried this new tool that we built? Or have you migrated from this platform to this platform? And we'll find that just by addressing problems that teams have, we'll be able to get them to migrate. And so this will capture, depending on each campaign, this adoption curve looks differently for each campaign, will capture a fair amount of the population. And this is kind of in the positive message side of the change campaign. After a while, our message starts becoming different, very different. We'll start saying things like, warning, we're going to deprecate the old way of doing things. It's coming. And so this ends up capturing a more risk-averse set of people that say, oh, now I need to pay attention because the thing I am using is going away. So I'm going to start planning my change to integrate, to pay down this technical debt or to migrate to this new tool. And then this last message is very, very powerful. Saying that you're the last to go, you do not want to be the last person out of the data center at Netflix, right? You don't want to be the last person on Java 7. You don't want to be the one who says, I held up the whole company. And so being able to say this to certain teams in a polite way, but just making you aware that you're the last, is extremely powerful. And you'll see people jumping. But inevitably, there's always this last 1 or 2%. And this is where we actually have to, we've done a great job of getting to this point, but there's a 1 or 2% of teams, even at Netflix, that will say we don't have bandwidth to do this change, or we were just in a situation recently where this team had this application and they were rewriting it in a different platform, and so they were just kind of keeping this thing on life support, and they realized that they couldn't keep it on life support anymore. They actually needed to go through this change, and it was like, they were way at the end. They were like the last 1 or 2%. And so at that point, engineering tools, we'll have to roll up our sleeves and really sit with them and push them over the finish line. And we're willing to do that because we want to get this migration done. So this is, we don't encourage people to wait to the last 1 or 2%. We want them to do this themselves, but inevitably we want to help them. And so in order to kind of successfully do this, we have to really measure change. And so this is an example of a tool we built internally that takes stock of it communicates to all running instances in our cloud and determines certain metrics like what version of Java they're on, what version of Tomcat, and we can essentially at any given time ask the question, who's on Java 7, and we need to communicate with them, and then also measure how far we've gone through the migration. And so in order to make change effective, we really have to be able to measure that change. Another interesting problem came up when we migrated from Perforce to Git was all of a sudden, we no longer were able to tell who owned which Git repository. So the great thing about Git is that people can create all these Git repositories, but now we had all these Git repositories that we were unclear as to who the owner was. And so we built a tool. This is a very unattractive, but it's REST, so it's great. Picture of the tool we built called Krieger. And Krieger's job is to scan all the Git repos, determine, based on the commit, who their manager was at the time of that commit, and then attribute, based on some weighted algorithm, who the manager that currently owns this particular application. And then take that Git repo and then trace it to an application deployed in production. And so being able to gather this information in real time helps us to automate change, because if we find an application but we don't know who the owner is, it's really hard for us to target communication to that team. So our goal for automating change, we really want automating change and measuring change. We really want to make change as easy as possible. And so in the future, we're going to be building tools that help launch campaigns, so teams can launch their own campaigns and gather information and target this communication. And so teams can start launching campaigns against each other and help make change easier at Netflix. So the 4 big takeaways from this talk is that, as an engineering tools team, we really want to focus on understanding our customers, developing a strong customer support model, making space for innovation, and making continuous change easy. And if this sounds interesting, come work for us. So I'm currently hiring a full stack engineer for my team. You can email me or I'll make the slides available. Click on the link, and I'm done. So I have 8 minutes for questions. This is great. So. And I can see, so if you guys have any questions or you want to use the mic, anyone? Sure. Yes. No, there's no plan. So we had 2 buildings in Los Gatos, we're building 2 more. And so we're expanding the space in Los Gatos to accommodate more and more people. So, yeah. It makes recruiting challenging, let's say. So the question is, how do we deal with potentially trust issues between us and teams that decide not to use our tools and want to go off the paved road, essentially, right? Yeah, so we actually kind of encourage it. When a team says we really, a great example is we want to maybe use, our core deployment model is AMIs and deploy production, and I didn't say that another buzzword that you may have heard a little bit of called Docker. I don't know if you've heard of it. And so some teams may come to us and say, I want to use Docker, and we'll say, great, let us know how that goes. And then actually, it's not a contentious conversation. It's we want to hear about what challenges you run into, right? And the advantage of having maybe a single team do this experiment is that if it fails miserably, if it crashes and burns, the impact, the blast radius is limited to that one team, right? And so you have teams that will try an experiment, and then they'll come back and they'll say, it failed, and I want to use your tools again or we couldn't staff up a sufficient number, because when you start building your own infrastructure, you inevitably have to support it. And so now these engineers are spending more time managing their Docker containers and the team no longer wants to support that extra cost, right? So there's an advantage of using a supported model that we provide. So there isn't any trust issues with us to them, but I think we have to be careful about building an environment where our customers don't trust us to stay innovative, right? And so that's the delicate balance we have to weigh. So, and it's not to say that Docker isn't used. I don't want to give the impression that we don't use Docker, but yeah, sorry. Any other questions? Do you have a specific question about the shift to Trusty? So I think the original thinking behind going from CentOS to Ubuntu was more along the lines of better tooling and insight. And most teams at Netflix aren't going to take advantage of a lot of the underlying infrastructure of Ubuntu. And so teams like on the performance team had found that maybe they could take advantage of some of the underlying infrastructure and tools that are available on Ubuntu. And so that was why we started migrating to Ubuntu. But then we found ourselves in a place where we had Trusty, Precise, and CentOS. And so our goal was to get onto one platform. So it made it easier for engineering tools and the rest of operations engineering to support that one operating system. So, not in the near term. Maybe 2016. Any other questions?
When you guys are protecting the hack days, the managers are there for supporting. Does that mean that the managers know how to support in production and elsewhere, or how do you handle that?
Yeah. So one thing I didn't really mention is, and the question is, how do managers who are there supporting the hack days, how can they support production? Almost every single manager at Netflix, and this is awesome and intimidating at the same time. So myself, directors, VPs, they're all software engineers, or engineers, I should say. And so we have a cultural bias towards engineering. Our CEO is an engineer, so there's not a problem. So I might not be as good. Like I've built tools, like Krieger was actually something I built, and then some guy on my team took it and made it awesome, and then I remember that I was a manager and he's an engineer, and this is a great relationship. But yeah, we're fully capable, most of us, of doing something like that. And I think that's the only way it's going to work.
You mentioned that you have most of the team in Los Gatos. So because people are available face-to-face, does that adversely affect the documentation or some of the other communication that hinders you in onboarding new people, for example, because a lot of information is institutionalized?
I think it has potentially suffered, but that's not our intent, right? So our intent is to have pretty good documentation. Our intent is to have pretty good onboarding docs for employees. But, and I'm sorry, I didn't repeat the question. The question is, you were using the mic, so it doesn't matter. So yeah, that's not our intent. So we still are focused on writing documentation and making sure make it easy. I would argue that documentation, the problem with documentation is it's immediately out of date as soon as you write it. So focusing on usability and getting feedback from the tools is a much better solution. But then we have a different problem, which is we have potentially, you don't even know which tool is available to get started with. So you have to have some documentation, right? So good question. All right, so we have 1 minute, so maybe one more question, or we can all go see Simon Wardley, which I'm excited about.
How do you guys handle onboarding of new engineers with all the tools that are available?
Yeah, so how do we handle onboarding of new engineers? I would argue very poorly right now. So since we hire senior engineers, there's this underlying assumption like, hey, we'll just throw you in there and give you one doc and then you'll be ready to go. But we really, as a company, we understand that like for months, the first 2 or 3 months or even more, you're going to be very ineffective because all you're going to be doing is drinking from the fire hose because you're going to be learning not only what your team does, but everything about how we deploy Netflix, and then you're going to hear, like, I don't know if you guys, anyone here attended the other talks from the data, from Eva and Charles from the big data team. I was learning things about Netflix that I hadn't learned before because there's so much complexity. And so for a long time, you're just going to be kind of absorbing, and your brain's going to be, every day you're going to be sleeping like a baby because you're tired from all the learning. But at some point, you're going to start realizing you understand certain things. And so for me, when I'm onboarding new employees, I try to give them something small, very tangible, very localized, but might give them a taste of one area of Netflix. And then as they start getting on board, they're going to ask some questions, and they'll slowly learn more and more and more. But the expectations are pretty low for engineers in the first couple months. And then we also run a boot camp, which for new engineers across Netflix to kind of introduce them to try to get past the whole unknown unknowns. And I would argue you probably need to do that same boot camp after they start, and then again like 6 months later, because you'll have more context. Okay, well, thank you very much.